Sorry about that. It seems to happen all the time. The note sheet that you'll need for today is the Chapter 12, Section 1. It's the one that has the Venn diagram on the left-hand side for your reading notes. And then on the right-hand side is where you'll want to take notes today. And like I told you, this should be a quick one today. At least I'm going to try to make it a quick one. Keep focused. Got a week and a half left here. Let's finish strong before break. And remember my deal: if we have 100% both classes on our video checks, next Friday could be the day. Our objective for this video lesson is to start to take a look at Reconstruction. And Reconstruction is the process of putting the Union back together with the southern states, 36 states. And what we're going to look at today, the questions we're going to try to answer here in this video today, is what were Abraham Lincoln's thoughts on reconstructing the United States after the Civil War ended, what other ideas were out there, and just a general idea of who should control Reconstruction. And this is going to lead us into an activity in class tomorrow, which will kind of walk through some of these questions, and you'll get to give your own input as to what you're thinking based on kind of what you know, what you're learning here tonight, and some information that I'll give you in class tomorrow. So let's take a look at Abraham Lincoln. Lincoln's plan for Reconstruction is known as the 10% plan. In his thinking, it's a very moderate idea. Lincoln's goal from the beginning was to preserve the Union. And so it's not surprising that his plan is, he views it as kind of an initial offer. He understands that he's going to have to work with Congress, but he wants Congress to understand from the beginning that his goal is to get the South back in the Union really as quickly as possible. And here's his plan in a nutshell. In order to get states back into the Union, Lincoln believes that there are going to have to be people in those southern states who can both vote and hold office. In order to be able to vote and hold office, we need to know that these are white Southerners who are committed to this process of Reconstruction. And so Lincoln believes, and this is what he kind of tells Congress, what he tells people, is that he's going to offer people presidential pardons. And if he gives them a presidential pardon, he's going to give it to them because they take an oath of loyalty to the Union. Once you get a presidential pardon, you then become pardoned for anything you might have done during the war. And what Lincoln believes that does is it helps you to regain citizenship, and it gives him the two things he needs. It gives him people who can vote, and it gives him people who they can vote for. And so then Lincoln outlines, and this is why his plan becomes known as the 10% plan. He says once there are 10% of the pre-war voters that have taken the oath of loyalty and have their citizenship back, that state can begin the process of being readmitted to the Union. And what that means is, they can call a constitutional convention. Lincoln's going to make some demands of them. They're going to have to ratify the 13th Amendment. They're going to have to say, yes, slavery is no longer a part of our future. And from there, they can start to work their way back into the Union. Now, Lincoln obviously dies pretty shortly after the war is over, so his plan may have been more developed. There may have been more pieces to it. He may have worked with Congress a little bit more. There's no telling what he would have done, but we know what his original plan was, and it's this 10% plan. In that plan, there is no concrete idea or plan for the freedmen. We don't really know what Lincoln would have done with the freed slaves. Would he have, pushed for immediate citizenship? Would he have pushed for some other idea? We just don't know. We don't have that information. Lincoln's plan leads directly to counter plans, and I'm going to share one of those with you. Some of the people in his own party, some Republicans, do not like the 10% plan. And this is a picture here of Thaddeus Stevens. And Thaddeus Stevens is what we would call a radical Republican, a person who is a believer that Reconstruction needs to go a little bit further. And by a little bit, I mean a lot. Many Republicans did not think the 10% plan went far enough. There's no concept of punishment. And there's a lot of people, on the heels of this very devastating war who want there to be an element of punishment in Reconstruction. And so many Republicans do not think the 10% plan went far enough. Led by Thaddeus Stevens, the radical Republicans passed something called the Wade-Davis Bill in 1864. In a nutshell, the Wade-Davis Bill is a law, and it's like December of 1864, but it's a law that would have given control of Reconstruction, at least to the Congress, in that they would be passing laws for Reconstruction. Now, this is also kind of their first offer. It ups Lincoln's number to over a majority. It starts to make exceptions for certain kinds of Southerners, and we'll talk about those more in class. But the idea of the main idea, there's two main ideas that you should take away from the Wade-Davis bill. And the first is the radicals in the Republican Party want the Congress to have some control over this process, whereas Lincoln believes that this is something that should be, Reconstruction is something that should be kind of controlled by the White House and by the president. The way that the Wade-Davis bill works out is that the Congress passes it, and Abraham Lincoln uses what's called the pocket veto. The pocket veto is something that the president can do where if he holds on to a bill long enough and the Congress adjourns, the bill just dies. And what's interesting about this is the radicals give him this bill, the Congress give him this bill, and he can either sign it, veto it, or just hang on to it. And he just held on to it. The fact that the radicals adjourned without Lincoln acting on that bill meant that they weren't ready to push Lincoln yet. And so just as the war is kind of coming to an end, as this process is just starting to be thought out, we see that the radicals in the Congress and Lincoln, they both sort of understand that they're going to have to work with one another. And the radicals adjourn, and they're not going to be back for a while, and they're comfortable with that because there's somewhat of a trust with Lincoln that they understand that there's going to be some give and take. There are other views on Reconstruction, and I'm just going to outline these very quickly. We have really four groups that I think you should be aware of in terms of their feelings about Reconstruction. The first, I would call them moderate Republicans. Some might call them the conservative Republicans. Lincoln represents this view pretty well. He wants to get the union back together soon, as soon as possible. They want to start looking forward. They want to stop looking back. The war is behind us, and let's get past that. Let's move the nation past that. And the South, in this plan, will have to do some minimal things. There's some hoops that the South are going to have to jump through. They're significant hoops. Don't get me wrong. I don't mean to minimize that. Like passing the 13th Amendment, they're going to have to probably repudiate secession. They're going to have to say sorry about secession. You can't do that. We admit that. But there's going to be some roadblocks set up, some minimal hoops that the Southerners are going to have to jump through before they can come back into the Union. Oaths of loyalty, things like that. Another group within the Republican Party. So you can kind of see the Republican Party has not splinter. There's two different thoughts and philosophies in the Republican Party. The other group in the Republican Party is the radical Republicans. And this group is led by Thaddeus Stevens. Another example of a radical Republican will be Charles Sumner, the guy who was beaten in the Senate in our last unit. In their opinion, the Union will be repaired gradually, and the Union will only be repaired if the South pays for what they did. The South must pay for their crimes. The freedmen must be the focus of Reconstruction for the radicals. The freedmen and the former slaves have to be a big part of the plan moving forward. And in the radicals' mind, the South, they have to pay for their treason. A couple of other groups, and we have Democrats, and we have two different kinds of Democrats. Now, they aren't split by their views as much as they are split by their section. You have Northern Democrats, and the Northern Democrats will represent them by Pendleton, a guy named George Pendleton from, I believe he's from Ohio. And Pendleton, he believes that the Union must compromise with the Southern power base. That the South isn't going anywhere, and the fact that we won this war really just kind of puts more perspective on healing and getting past the war. Also, the Democrats want to regain their political power while downplaying the connection to secession. So, the Democrats are, they got to be careful because now they're linked to secession, to the party of the South. Northern Democrats need to find a way to reconnect with their Southern Democratic allies while getting rid of and putting to the side some of the things that are going to be negative, like secession, like their commitment to slavery. The Southern Democrats, people like Jefferson Davis, all Southern whites essentially, they understand that the Union defeated the Confederacy, but they also think that the Union should negotiate the peace. There is a loss. They understand that they lost, but there's also still defiance, and they want the best deal that they can get. They believe that there's a deal to be had, and in that it might be controlling the process. I think most Southerners at this point have accepted the fact that slavery is probably off the table, but maybe they can control some of the things moving forward. And in their minds, the South will rise again. And so this is just in a nutshell where Abraham Lincoln was and where the other views on Reconstruction were developing. Sorry, passing period is kind of distracting me. And in terms of who should control Reconstruction, that really boils down to the Republicans. The moderates under Lincoln, they'd like to see Lincoln control it. They'd like to see the presidency control it. And the radicals want to see the Congress have a heavy hand in it. So tomorrow what we're going to do is we're going to take these ideas of Reconstruction that you got out of your reading and some of what we covered here, and we're going to really just kind of think about the process of Reconstruction. I promised you a short video, and I'm going to cut it to under 11. See you tomorrow.